good news for the United Nations. M4s are rolling off the assembly lines at astounding speed.
With an explosion of artillery rounds and with the surge of Challenger tanks, thousands of British troops and Marines burst out of their positions to the south of Basra and headed for the heart of Iraq's second city.
From groundbreaking innovations to the most feared machines ever built, these tanks represent the pinnacle of military engineering. I'm James Hanson, and today we're diving deep into the armoured beasts that have shaped the battlefield and rewritten the rules of warfare. So buckle up as we explore the stories, the strategies, and the sheer power behind the world's most legendary tanks. Welcome to our countdown of the top 10 military tanks in history. First up, it's the Type 99, China's first mass-produced third-generation main battle tank. Now, to some people, the Type 99 is just a repurposed piece of old Soviet technology, and on one level, that is true. I mean, it is based on the old T92 chassis, for instance, but there's a reason it's still being used by the country with the world's largest standing army. It was introduced by the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the PLA, as a replacement for the old Type 88, and it entered service in 2001. Now, the key point is that the Type 99 was designed as China's answer to the third-generation main battle tanks being produced in the West. Obviously, the Abrams, the Challenger, things like the Leopard II. The latest model, the Type 99A, comes in at 55 tons, meaning it is considerably heavier than the 43-ton Type 96 or its 46-ton Russian competitor, the T90. For a world-leading tank design, we don't know that much about its capabilities, partly because of the secrecy surrounding its production. What we do know, however, is that the Type 99A has a powerful 1,500 horsepower engine, superior armour protection than the old Type 96, and a turret with arrow-shaped applique armour, composite panels, spaced modular armour, and a JD3 infrared jammer. It's also got a digital maintenance system and has a much better fuel efficiency than most Western or Russian competitors. In recent years, obviously, more attention has been paid to China's Navy and Air Force and Rocket Force than its ground forces. But remember, China now produces more classes of battle tank than any other country, and the Type 99A is foremost among them. Next up, it's the heavily armoured and highly mobile Challenger 3, a British main battle tank. Now, we have jumped the gun a bit here because the Challenger 3 isn't due to enter service yet, not until 2025, so next year, but it's following in the illustrious footsteps of the original Challenger, which was produced during the Second World War. The Challenger 1 was the British Army's main battle tank during the Gulf War, and then the Challenger 2 saw action in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq. And of course, in recent years, Britain has also been supplying Ukraine with Challenger 2 tanks to defend against Russia's invasion. So, what do we know about the Challenger 3? Well, it's 65 long tons with an all-new turret and improved hull. 148 of them are being produced, and it's essentially a conversion of the old Challenger 2. But the most significant advancement is the gun. Out goes the old 120mm L30A1, and in comes the new 120mm L55A1. It's a smoothbore gun, and it's pretty much an upgraded version of the L55s used on the Leopard tanks. As I mentioned, the first of them should enter service next year, and the last of them by 2030. OK, let's take a look now at the T90, a third-generation Russian main battle tank that Vladimir Putin once described as the best in the world. But is it? Well, designed as the replacement for the old Soviet T-72, it's been used in all of Russia's recent conflicts, including in Dagestan, Syria, and of course now in Ukraine. Think of the T-90 as the definitive tank of the new Russia, the post-Soviet Russia. Now, on the plus side, it's relatively affordable to produce as far as main battle tanks go. It's got Contact 5 explosive reactive armour, an 125mm smoothbore gun, and has an infrared jamming system. It also needs a crew of just 3. However, it does still have many of the technical deficiencies of earlier Soviet-era tank designs, including problems with the autoloader in the turret. Basically means it's easier to blow up. Plus, it's got limited gun elevation and has a very slow reverse speed. So look, it's definitely a very good tank, and it deserves its place on this list. But is it the world's best, as Putin claimed? Sorry, Vlad, it's not. Okay, next we have the Tiger tank, a German heavy tank of World War II, which has impenetrable armour, powerful gun, huge size, making it a legend in its time. The Tiger, of course, struck terror into the hearts of Allied tank crews when it first appeared in 1942. In total, more than 1,300 were produced, seeing action across Europe, North Africa and the Eastern Front. Its armour was 100 millimetres thick at the front, meaning Allied guns could do very little about it. If you saw a Tiger coming towards you during the Second World War, you started to panic, and in many senses, with good reason. The Tiger's own 88mm gun could penetrate 100mm of armour at ranges of up to 1,000 metres. But I think it's worth saying the Tiger wasn't perfect. It was pretty unreliable and it caught fire quite easily as well. There were also, and this is a crucial point, there were just never enough Tigers in the field to have a genuine impact on the outcome of the war. However, it did take on huge symbolic significance. The first prototype was scheduled to be ready for Hitler's birthday, and when the British captured Tiger 131 in Tunisia in 1943, both Churchill and the King came to see it in North Africa before it was shipped back to London and displayed on Horse Guards Parade. It's worth saying you can actually see Tiger 131 to this day. You can pay a visit to our friends at the Tank Museum in Dorset. Well worth a visit. Great to see it up close and in person. Moving on now to the Leopard II, a third-generation German main battle tank that first came into service in 1979. Now, this was very much a product of the Cold War era, but it's still being used to this day, including on the front line in Ukraine. In fact, the Leopard II has been deployed by more nations than any other main battle tank. And it was so advanced for its time, even the mighty American M1 Abrams has some Leopard II DNA in it. And we'll talk a bit more about the M1 Abrams in a bit. But what about the spec? It's operated by a crew of 4. It's powered by a 12-cylinder water-cooled diesel engine producing 1,500 horsepower, meaning it's capable of driving at a top speed of 42 miles an hour. And crucially, it's armed with Rheinmetall's superb 120mm smoothbore gun, which has one of the most advanced fire control systems in the world, with a ballistic computer, a laser range finder and thermal night vision. In brief, if you think of tank designers balancing firepower, armour and mobility, then the Leopard II has a pretty perfect combination of all three. Next up, we have one of my favourites, the Centurion, which was the primary British Army main battle tank of the post-World War II period. Development began in 1943. Manufacture started in 1945. So the thing about the Centurion, it's a tank informed by the experience of World War II, in particular of fighting in the deserts of North Africa. But it didn't see action until after the Second World War. Now look, it's hard to generalise about the Centurion because there were 13 different marks. And to put that into context, came online in 1945, first used in the Korean War of the early 50s, and a small number of the beached armoured recovery version were still serving with the British forces during the war in Iraq in 2003. That's 58 years after it was first introduced. Even to this day, some derivatives of the Centurion are still in use. For example, if you think of the Elephant, which remains the primary main battle tank of South Africa, that's got Centurion DNA in it. So what made the Centurion so good? Well, it's got a Rolls-Royce Meteor engine in the back, it's got a Merritt Brown transmission, which means it steers very nicely, and it's got a 20-pounder or 84mm gun. Now, the other thing to note is that the Centurion crew were particularly well trained, meaning a Centurion driver was a proper specialist. In short, the Centurion absolutely deserves its place as one of the all-time great tanks. Right, we're coming to the business end of our list now. Let's move on to the K2 Black Panther. Now, this main battle tank stands out as one of the most advanced armoured vehicles globally. Made by South Korea, some experts have even called this the best tank on Earth. Designed by Hyundai, the K2 features a German Rheinmetall 120mm L55 smoothbore gun. It can fire between 10 and 15 rounds per minute. It's got an automatic loader as well, meaning it can load projectiles even when moving over pretty uneven surfaces. Recent upgrades also include a semi-active in-arm suspension unit and a high-resolution terrain scanning system, which is pretty cool. But perhaps the Black Panther's greatest attribute is its advanced composite armour, which gives it an unmatched level of survivability. The K2 also has a missile approach warning system and other advanced sensors that improve its combat performance. On the other side, the drawbacks, well, the main one is the cost. I mean, the K2, as a lot of people know, is very, very expensive. It costs a whopping $8.5 million per unit, making it the priciest tank on the planet. So, why is South Korea willing to make such an investment? Well, the answer to that lies with what its neighbours to the north are getting up to.
M4s are rolling off the assembly lines at astounding speed. This latest in Army tanks is said to be superior to anything the Nazis have in action.
Next up, it's the M4 Sherman, the most widely used tank series among the Western Allies, which went down in history as one of the best tanks of the Second World War. So what made the Sherman so good? Well, first of all, the US was capable of producing huge numbers of them, 50,000 in fact, by the end of the war. And that was largely down to the fact that the American automobile industry refocused its efforts. So it stopped building cars, started building tanks. You had the likes of Ford and Chrysler and General Motors absolutely churning them out. Secondly, and this isn't very sexy, but it is very important, it was reliable. It was easy to maintain. The M4 Sherman would start in the morning, it would run all day. And then thirdly, in contrast to its predecessor, the M3, the main gun was on a 360-degree traversing top-mounted turret. The gun itself, 75mm, it was good, it's not great, but it did the job. However, the M4 Sherman is not without its detractors. One of the features it became best known for was its flammability, and this gave rise to its rather unfortunate nickname of Ronsons. They're the Ronson tanks, as in the old cigarette lighters, the Ronsons, which came with that slogan, lights every time, and that was what people slightly derisively referred to the Sherman as. However, it's worth saying, there's a bit of a myth around this, and actually we've done an episode on this. History Undone regular Chris Copson pointed out in our recent myth-busting episode, go and check it out, that the nickname is a bit unfair, not least because the Sherman actually had a very good track record when it comes to cruise survival. If you haven't seen that video, you can find a link in the description below. But in short, as an all-round general-purpose tank, the Sherman was one of the very best of the Second World War. Okay, up next is the M1 Abrams, a third-generation American main battle tank and one of the heaviest tanks in service at nearly 73.6 short tons. Now, this is really one of the big boys, sometimes nicknamed the Beast, Dracula, or the Whispering Death. The M1 Abrams dates back to the 1970s, came about after a failed joint project between America and West Germany to replace the outdated M60. Now, eventually, the Chrysler Corporation was chosen to produce what became known as the M1 Abrams, and that was named after the former US General Creighton Abrams. The original design had a 105mm gun, but the upgraded models, the M1A1 and the M1A2, have an 120mm smoothbore gun, and the Abrams can engage and destroy enemy tanks up to a mile away. Now, most of the armour details remain classified, but we do know it's got British-invented Chobham armour, and new armour innovations include things like depleted uranium, which is sandwiched between two steel sheets. It entered service in 1980, but it really made its name, of course, during the Gulf War and Operation Desert Storm. 2,000 M1A1 Abrams were deployed, and by the end of the war, they had destroyed 2,600 Iraqi armoured vehicles without a single Abrams tank being destroyed by the enemy. Now, there were a few that didn't make it out. There were 9 that were destroyed either by friendly fire or on purpose by the US forces to prevent their capture if they were damaged. But really, in Desert Storm, a legend was born, and rightly so. Okay, lastly, we have the Merkava, a series of main battle tanks used by the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and widely classed as one of the best tanks in the world. There's a reason that Israel's enemies fear the Merkava. It is a phenomenally good tank series. Development began in 1970 after Israel, well, pretty much realised it needed to be more self-sufficient. It previously had relied upon things like the British Centurion, which we've talked about, and American M48 tanks, and Israel realised it needed to develop its own. The Merkava officially entered service in 1979, first used extensively in the 1982 war with Lebanon, and the most recent model is the Merkava Mark IV. It has modular armour on the sides, allows it to be rapidly repaired and returned to the field if damaged. And because the rear armour is thinner, you've got chains with iron balls being attached to detonate projectiles before they hit the main armoured hull. Notably, it's the first contemporary tank without a loader's hatch in the turret roof, the aim being to reduce the risk of penetration by anti-tank missiles. And like its predecessors, the Mark IV has an 120mm main gun, but can fire a wider range of ammunition, including high-explosive anti-tank warheads and the armour-piercing, fin-stabilised discarding sabot. Now, the Merkava comes with an Israeli-designed Caterpillar track system designed to reduce track shedding in rocky conditions. Remember, it's designed to be used in places like Lebanon and the Golan Heights, so that's perfect for those kind of conditions. Got a laser warning receiver, which notifies the crew of laser-guided anti-tank missiles, and the fire control system can launch smoke grenades to obscure the tank from the laser beam. And all Merkava tanks are fitted with a remote-controlled M2 Browning heavy machine gun, which is controlled from within the turret. In short, the Merkava is a world-class tank, and it's seen a lot of action over the years. Well, there we go. That wraps up our list of the top 10 military tanks in history. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel History Undone, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.